Good afternoon. Hi. Thank you everybody for coming out. Welcome to this session of Open Book. I know it's a particularly hard time. And I know certainly those of us on stage are battling a bit or a lot. And thank you for coming. We're hoping that while feeling and honoring the difficulty that we live with as being, women especially, but not exclusively in this country, we will nonetheless be able to have this conversation and have some fun, because I think both Dr. T and I believe as feminists in feminist rage and feminist love and erotic justice. There'll be some erotic justice talk. Thanks to Open Book's headline sponsor, Leopard's Leap Wines. And of course on stage, I am joined by Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. And I'm sure she needs no introduction. I'm going to start by saying that if you're not following her on Twitter, you're not living your life right. So please fix your life. You know what to do. And if you're not on Twitter, join Twitter so you can follow her. Because shame. You're not living, you're not feministing right. You're not. And if we're going to do what she calls the pleasure revolution, right? Do the right thing. Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng is a doctor, that's why she's Dr. T. She's a health communicator. Many of you will know her through various aspects of her public media work. She is the host of Sex Talk with Dr. T on Moja Love on DSTV. She has contributed and continues to contribute to various national and regional print media outlets, including the Sunday Times, the Guardian, Cosmo SA, Teen Vogue, and various articles under the NASPA's Women 24. She's also the resident health expert on Metro FM. And before that, for several years, I think 3 years, 4? Yeah. 3 to 4. Yes, she was the resident sex expert on Kaya FM. She's an award-winning, she's won awards for her work that invites us and teaches us to think about the intersections of health and pleasure, especially sexual health and pleasure, to think about the various ways in which we can think about sexual difference and desire and health in ways that are not antagonistic. I know certainly, as a feminist in the world, I am delighted to have this conversation and to have Dr. Tlaleng, Dr. T, to talk with today, but certainly just to have, to read and to listen to as I navigate life. So, welcome to Dr. To sexual health and pleasure is brand new. It's so brand new, in fact, that when they sent me a copy to read to prepare for this conversation, they sent me this. But even though I read this and actually could do weird things that I would never do to a proper book. So I could do all of those things and write my notes that are going to help me ask my questions today. It's already a bestseller. Now and actually ask some questions. So Tlaleng, thank you so much for this book. I think, you know, reading it feels and it reads like such an important book on so many levels. And I think you're able to do, as only you do so often in your work, in this book, bring together a whole range of things that do very important work. So it's incredibly informative, right? And it's funny and witty and sexy in the most beautiful of ways. I loved that you have these 3 sections, right? You have a section on this kind of very detailed, informative section, because of course we assume often, or maybe we don't, but we often assume that people know a whole range of things about vaginas and breasts and penises and I don't know, and noses and breasts and feet and all sorts of things, right, that are all sexual. But you don't make that assumption, right? And often we go to our doctors, and so thank you for this book. That's not the first thing. And you dive right in, right? I think it's important to have this book because, as you rightly point out, there's often so much stigma around sexuality, right? So on the one hand, and I think on the one hand there's mystification, right? So many of us have been at a stage where we were given information about our bodies or about sexuality that perhaps later on as adults, women and people of various genders, we kind of look back at and think, what the hell is that? And you'll say towards the beginning you speak about the importance of creating alternative spaces to be able to have a whole range of conversations about bodies, about sexuality, about sex. Why do you think, or maybe you don't, but why do you think right now is a particularly important time to have conversations, or to have books, to have a book like this that brings together health and pleasure, and in ways that are not apologetic?
Wow, dumelang. Hi guys. Those who don't know, in 1 hour book, just if you are interested. So I'm a young person myself, and when I qualified as a medical doctor, I was much younger than I am now. And I didn't always think I would be Dr. Sex, to be honest. You know, but I think it chose me, and it's through that journey of being a person amongst a room of healthcare professionals where people would choose to ask these difficult questions. And in the moment, I didn't realize that I was forming very organically a path for myself that's very different from the mainstream medical specialization. And so it's in retrospect, when people start commenting, when patients come back and say, oh my gosh, that advice was spot on, it worked. But now you're going, where am I gonna get this? So then I started to realize the gaps that were there, because for a long time, even the type of discussions I was having with my own mother around just growing up in general, but specifically around bodies, menstruation, and relationships, I also thought that was normal. And it's only when I went to boarding school that I realized that my peers don't know half as much as I did. And even those who did, you know, they were not getting it from sources which are trustworthy in my experience, which at the time was a caregiver, and they still couldn't go back to their trusted adult when they did have difficulties. And so that experience of being a young person in high school, in a boarding school, and then later being a young doctor, it kind of said, okay, maybe there is something going on here. And so this book for me is particularly important because 12 years later, I've worked in every level of healthcare, from community clinics to district hospitals to tertiary, quaternary hospitals. There isn't a part of medicine that I haven't been a part of. And one thing is common. Patients don't know their bodies. People don't know what is normal physiological processes. And I think because of communication, PR, marketing, a lot of medicine and the health communications, public health communication, is now in the hands of capitalists who are making money out of our bodies. And so, again, you know, we are here now, and it is the week that it is in South Africa. And so much of abnormal sexual interactions is normalized. So much of what is abnormal about relationships and how we navigate relationships that is abnormal is sort of like so nonchalant, like people just do things. And I mean, I look back at my Twitter search history, and I found tweets from 2013, 2014 talking about this very thing that's happening this week. And so for me, the anger, the turmoil, the helplessness, the complete utter destruction that I feel this week, I've been feeling it ever since I had to stitch up 2-year-olds who were raped, where you have to beg for a police station to bring you a DNA kit. It's 2019 and South Africa is short of DNA kits still. And so the book is timed, I think, just because the goddesses wanted perhaps to be that way, but it's a deliberate extension of my work, of who I am. It's a deliberate extension and an unapologetic extension of my activism. And through the book, because my voice is kind of familiar now, when you hear that I'm on radio, TV, you're either gonna roll your eyes and be like, oh, that one again, or you're gonna be like, oh yes, actually, let's pay attention. So I invoke those types of reactions, and the book is one of those. And I hope that bridging public health information and celebrating women's pleasure and centering that, right? Because we know that gender and racial bias in medicine is well documented. There isn't a book out there where, as a woman or a person who is of a sexual or gender minority or gender non-conforming, that you can pick up and find yourself somewhere in there. And so that's why the book for me is part of activism, and that's why I call it the revolution, but particularly pleasure revolution. Because sex and sexuality has been made to seem inherently diseased and bad. And so with the book, I hope to just normalize healthy sexual behavior and relationships and expression.
So, making the choices you made, you're often accused of making it easier for young people to have sex. What do you have to say to that? Do you make it easier for young people to have sex? Should you be making it easier for young people to have sex? Is there something wrong with making it easier for young people to have sex?
Right. And that's such an important question. And I think often because sex in itself is something that's so heavily policed, and the enjoyment of sex, especially for women, is something that often comes, if at all, on the second page. And as a young person who also had questions about my body, had questions about, you know, how to break up with a boyfriend. Luckily for me, I had a mother who could help me through that. But there's a lot of young people who don't have that. And I think people who think comprehensive sexuality education makes it easy for young people to have sex, they don't actually know what they're talking about. And they are basing their fear and their own perverted ideas of what sexuality is, as if it's penis getting into a vagina and that's that. No one is teaching children that. Trust me, God designed it that you know where what fits where. Trust me, no one is to tell anybody that. That one, granted, everyone will know where to put what where. But what's important is to know, for example, what consent is. It's important to know that sex is only sex because it's consensual between people who are legally able to consent to sex. That the language of using sex as a substitute for rape and assault is problematic. And so on a language, we need to normalize genitalia because they are part of anatomical body parts. That doesn't make people have easier sex. It does make it though, that when unfortunately a young person is assaulted or raped and in the court of law, when the magistrate asks what happened to you, they don't say he took my guava, or he took my biscuits, or he put his dongol in my flower. That doesn't, legally that doesn't stick. And so as a society, if we keep saying, but why are all these cases thrown out of court? It's because young people just don't know how to explain what happened to them. And these are medical terms, the same way that we call a nose a nose. We don't call it a fenestrated airway passage. We call it a nose. And that's what it is. And so I mean, what I do, a lot of what I do, most of what I do, is referenced from global research, but also rooted very much into local research. The university currently known as Rhodes, they have an amazing psychology center there, where they do research that shows us that in fact young people want to know this information, but it needs to be credible, it needs to be evidence-based, it needs to be free of judgment and stigma. And then we look to places like the UNESCO guidelines that have come up with a very good document that can guide people, policymakers, school governing bodies, governments, program designers, on how to then handle the issue of comprehensive sexuality education. Saying to young people, don't have sex, I will kick you out the house, doesn't help. You are only teaching children that it's possible for you to abandon them as adults. And you are just giving children anxiety. That's actually what you're doing. Because whether you are 24, whether you are 36, whether you are 18, you still need to know how to go buy a condom. You still need to know how to put it on properly every single time. You still need to know what contraception is. You still need to know how to negotiate the use of safer sex tools. We need to teach young boys and men that at the point of saying no, that's not a catastrophe, beloved. Calm down. It's what you do after I've said no. And so we need to get to a point where we can say to people, it's normal to not want to have sex right now because there's an erect penis in the room. You can wait. No one's going to die over an erect penis. Indulge in it, simmer in your erection if you must. But I don't feel like having sex right now. But often people see and we teach consent as if that is the solid line and now everything is over. There's a catastrophe because somebody said no. It's not a catastrophe. It just means right now I may not be horny and I don't feel like having sex. It's what you do with that. So sexuality, comprehensive sexuality education is not about the act of having sex. It's about giving information that enables informed consent. It's about affirming people's sexual rights and their identity. And it's about bringing back human rights perspective into the work that you do, even as doctors and nurses, because often we are the gatekeepers, that leave a lot of people back into the margins.
Pleasure. But before I get into it, I want to spend a lot of time on pleasure. and you can ask questions on pleasure too. But before we get to that, I want to talk about hymen hate, right? And hymen obsession. So you write in a guide to sexual health and pleasure, which will be on sale outside. Please all get copies and Dr. T will sign. You write about the obsession with the hymen, and how this obsession with the hymen, the presence or the non-presence, and the delicate, the at once delicate and overly powerful hymen, is this thing that certainly as girls often is used as this thing to teach us to be a little afraid of our bodies, right? So for example, we know that people who do virginity testing, right, who invest in the idea that virginity, first of all, exists, but secondly, is a thing that can be measured and found in a woman's body on the one hand, so the pressure to keep your hymen, and the evidence of virginity is a hymen, but also at the same time, this idea that this thing, the only solid proof, is also so delicate. So if you use a tampon, it can break. If you horse ride, it can break. If you ride bicycles, it can break. It can.
Gqola, it broke long ago.
What do you think that's about? Why do you think it's so important? What is this? Why do you think this? What do you think this obsession with a seemingly physical thing does in teaching us certain ways of being in our bodies? Or what do you think it does generally in relation to anything?
Sure, I mean, it speaks to so much. I think if you look at the medical curriculum, right? And so on the one hand, we have cultural, religious obsession, right, with the hymen. But on the other hand, you will have minimal representation of the vulva and the clitoris and like what all of that is. So on the one hand, you are burdened with purity, maintaining a family name. You like literally your vulva and hymen belong to literally everybody but you. And then no one is saying, actually, this is what your vulva is, this is what the labia is, this is where the clitoris is, this is where the openings are, this is actually what menstruation is, and you're not dying every month because you're having a menstrual cycle. So a lot of what, and I say this to a lot of people, that, you know, our bodies are political, whether you like it or not. The difference is, what do you do with that? And some of us will put on the All-Stars and will march. Others won't. Others, you know. So it's just what you do with it. But the point is, there's a lot of people invested in your vulva and your vagina and what it does and what it doesn't do. And I was one of the people back a few years ago when that scandal for bursaries, virginity testing for bursaries came to light. And the argument was that, falsely so, that testing young girls for virginity every quarter will make them abstain from sex, and therefore somehow that will reduce the HIV rate. Now, if you look where HIV new infections are still leading the country and the world, it's in those districts. So beloveds, that's not working. It was never going to work anyway. But then what happens, to show you why culture and religion sometimes, in my view, is actually a form of violence, right? When it's about policing and withholding information from young people, is that what then tends to happen is that young women preserve vaginal virginity because they have these tests that are done. Someone comes with their fingers and they put them in your vagina every quarter to decide if you are worthy of a tertiary education. And no one does that to boys. But then, after preserving vaginal virginity, they are having anal sex instead. Because again, sexual pleasure, people are inquisitive, and they know. And we know that anal sex, or at least the anal mucosa, still puts you at a higher risk of HIV transmission than vaginal mucosa. But because we live in a homophobic society, we live and study medicine that itself is homophobic and sexist and racist. Young people are not told of other alternatives to being sexual. So young women, for example, will not be told that, in fact, the internal condom, it used to be called the female condom, now called the internal condom because of its FDA approval use for anal sex. No one will tell them that if you use that condom vaginally, the outer ring is big and everyone complains it's so big. But if you put a little bit of lubricant on there, it rubs your clitoris during penetration, so you're getting clitoral and vaginal stimulation. Who doesn't want two orgasms at the same time? But again, but women are not told these things, because how dare you experience pleasure? How dare you think you are worthy of these experiences outside of centering of a penis? And so all of it is linked. It's linked to patriarchy, it's linked to pharmaceutical and capitalist interests in women. It's linked to making women subservient. It's linked to this idea that as women, we can't be autonomous individuals. It must be 200 young maidens. And then the society is, So if you are that young woman, there's no way you're going to be like, well, actually, you know what? The Constitution actually allows me to go to school without having to undergo this. You are in a community of maybe 5,000 people. Do you really think you're going to be that one that speaks up and say, this is not okay? Because by default, you are saying you're actually not a virgin. If you do speak up, you get ostracized. So there's costs for young women, even those who know, to then speak up. So when people say, but women like it, the young people like it, I'm like, if they didn't, what would you do? So there's also punishment, right, for being a woman who then knows her rights, who fights for her rights, and who fights for her space. And I think that's where, for me, the issue is that men are allowed to be sexual, to express themselves, to lust, to do all of these things. And there's no real punishment, not even injustice, not even after they're raped, there's still no justice. And yet women, just by being normal and undergoing normal physiology during menstruation in India, I've got friends who work in India, and often they respond to young girls who have inhaled smoke and they've died because they are on their menstruation and they're deemed dirty. So they get, told to go to the periphery of the villages. Those are human rights violations. So I think we need to realize that as much as it's human nature also to want to belong, what are these strings that bind us? What is this glue? It can't be fingering young children every quarter. That can't be the glue. We need to find other things that create a sense of community. Yeah.
Oh. So in your chapter, well, in one of the chapters, you write about, okay, can I just admit to something?
It's a safe space.
It's fine, you can judge me, I don't mind if you judge me. How many of you knew that the clitoris couldn't be 11 centimeters long? Did you know? And I knew it was long, but I didn't know like 9. I knew there was a lot of, I was like 9. I was like 9, but when I read it, I was like, what is wrong? And okay, obviously I know how powerful the clitoris is, that's not the point. But I was like, okay. And yet so much about pleasure in women's bodies is about penetration, right? Yeah. It's like, and even when women say, no, the clitoris, and of course we know the clitoris is scary and dangerous and so on. But not for women, but like for the people who cut it and do all sorts of things to it. But 11 centimeters. Okay, anyway. I know some of you also didn't know. And I will blame. I'm the only person who didn't know. I know 11 centimeters, people.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of my favorites. I mean, there's lots of favorites. I just love this book. See, I told you, educational and fun. And then the clitoris. No, wait. Okay, one of the most magnificent parts of a woman's body. Yes, yes, yes. It's the only organ in the human body whose sole purpose is for pleasure. That's all it's for. 11 centimeters. I don't know. I know why they cut it and pretend all sorts of things. Now I understand. I finally, after all these years of being a feminist, I think I get a few more things just from the 11 centimeters. Even the agency to claim sexual pleasure publicly is always so ready for commodification, right? So when we say, we want to think about women and pleasure, we want to think about ourselves and pleasure, it's not only pleasure for some other people who are not women, but it's also how can we market and package and control this. So thank you so much for writing a book about pleasure that centers pleasure in so many ways, and that forces us or invites us sometimes to really think about what we mean by pleasure, right? Because it seems so obvious, and yet in so many ways it isn't. Am I projecting all these things on you, Tlaleng? Did you write a book and then I was like, I wanted you wrote the book and then I'm like, and then you said this thing.
And so when I do sex therapy at the clinic, when I'm there, I'm not there so often these days, but a lot of women self-loathe and self-judge. So before they walk into the consultation room, they've already decided that I'm a bad person for even wanting to think about my own body and my own pleasure. And so often, literally the first consultation is spent on, this is my body, and I mean it. Put the book down, look at your vulva, look at it. Because a lot of people only have a relationship with their vulva when they're grooming it, or it's during menstrual time and they have to change pads and tampons, or cups in my case. And it's really that basic for people, and I think it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. And yet, all of us, regardless of your class, regardless of your education, regardless of your race, we just have one thing in common. We do not understand our bodies. Which means when someone comes to you and says, yeah, I can see you've been cheating on me, you have a creamy discharge, you can't even clap back, because now you legit now, maybe you know you're not cheating, but you think something's wrong with you, because you don't know that pre-ovulation discharge is normal, right? So there's a lot of misconceptions and myths that are perpetuated by men, but because we also, just our default setting is one of confusion. You can't even, early on, when someone starts saying something like, it moves you, you cry, you think you're sick, you doctor shop, because, Dr. T says there's nothing wrong, this one did a swab and there's nothing, but every now and then, there's this creamy discharge. And now, unfortunately, a lot of us still don't talk, and we shouldn't have to talk, but even with our doctors, we still don't talk about the threat of violence that's associated with us not wanting to have sex or having our bodies do what they naturally do. So I've had to assist women who have been physically beaten up because that discharge made their vagina wet. Or for whatever reason, and I speak about it in the first section of the book, people are having painful sex. Whether it's fibroids, whether it's vaginal dryness, whether it's side effects for flu medication, there's so many things that can make your vagina dry intermittently. And so when I started to ask women more details about their relationships and Because we got tired to just counsel people and say it will be okay. And of course, you have to respect women when they say, I can't leave my family home. Even though, but I was like, but there must be other things. So what are the drivers of all of this? And so I realized that the only way that we can start to change that is through the book and writing it in a manner that even if you're not a woman, there are things you will learn in the book that will benefit a woman. I think that's how I was approaching it. So if you are a man, read the book. But my point is that book must help a woman or a queer woman have good, amazing sex, have toe-curling orgasm, mind-blowing, mind-numbing experiences. And I deliberately don't focus on the gender or the sexual orientation of people in the book. I focus on which genitals are involved. That's my primary concern. For me, it doesn't matter if you think you're gay, you are lesbian, bisexual, it doesn't matter. I just need you to be able to have the good sex you want on your terms. Whether it's penis to anal sex, vagina to vagina sex, mouth to anal, whatever, beloved. It needs to be wonderful. You know?
Absolutely. And we'll take questions soon, so get your questions ready or comments. So, you wrote a book about pleasure. Tell, and we at a book festival, so I have to ask you this question. It's in two parts. So you've been doing this work for a long time now. What are you still learning?
Oh, that's incredible. So I think the day I stopped being excited by seeing new patients and hearing people's life stories, like I know you come to me because you're sick, and that's my expertise. I can help you with that. But like I'm excited by your story. I'm excited by where you live. I'm excited by your view on the world. I'm excited to hear about your children and your future aspirations. Like that's what excites me about the work. And I learn so much from my patients. I give a lot just because I'm a doctor and people come to you for this. But I learn in incredible amounts from my patients. I mean, the first time I even knew that high blood pressure medication had an impact on sexual functioning and enjoyment was from an older woman. So had I just been that I'm a doctor, I know everything, I wouldn't have paid attention because medical school says whatever. But I'm fascinated by the fact that she knows that before we gave her the diagnosis, before she started the treatment, she can see the trend, she can see, like I'm fascinated by that. Like I want to know why when we prescribe certain medications, you still don't take it. Like what is it about adherence and understanding how your body works and still choosing not to? So I'll give you an example. Everyone is like, but South Africa, we've spent hundreds of millions in US dollars, right, around HIV prevention. But here we are, why is anything not working? And it's not working, I didn't do a PhD on this, but my patients taught me that it's not working because we only view them through two things. Prevent a pregnancy and don't get HIV, God forbid. Don't mess up with our statistics. So patients taught me that we need to look at them as whole beings. They taught me that you need to look, yes, you have statistics and all of those things, but people are humans. They live in communities and homes. And respect, I think, for me is a big thing. That despite, and be non-judgmental, because I can sit here and chill about human rights the whole day. But if you still can't take a day off work because you are in an insecure job, or because you're a sex worker and you cannot not be at work, and I'm saying, come and join me at the march to show your solidarity, and if you are not there, it means you are not a feminist enough. That's problematic. So I'm fascinated by that, you know, and I think the day that stops exciting me, I'll probably have to find another thing. But for now, I'm really moved by how, I mean, I've got Catholic priests who have ordered the book to incorporate it into marriage counseling. Now, that's a story I want to really know about. You know, I want to be there and be like, I need to see this. But that's what happens. And so, as much as I hope to move people and give people information in my Dr. T way, I'm learning a lot, you know, like Catholic priests who are like, hey, this is good, give this to us. And yeah, so that's I think what keeps me going, that's what, yeah, excites me.
I said it was a two-part. The second part is, you wrote the book. It's a wonderful book. Everybody get the book. And I know what I enjoyed, I know what I learned, I know which light bulb moments, I know which things were like, what? What surprised you, which, in a good way, in a pleasurable way, about the process of writing this book? So what was, not what you battled with, not what was weird for you, but what was good, what was pleasant, pleasurable for you about what, and that was surprising to you about writing this book?
So firstly, I always said I'm never gonna write a book. Never. Why? So I think when people started asking me for the book, that's when I thought, okay, maybe that's a thing. And what would happen, they wouldn't say write a book, but they would say things like, oh no, I wish my mom was here to hear that, or me and my friends were just talking about it yesterday, and like after your presentation, oh my gosh, I wish they were here. So I'm like, oh, so there's this sort of like wish to kind of extend this and spread this pleasure. I call it propaganda sometimes, but we settled on pleasure revolution. And so when Pam emailed, it was Terry, and she's like, hi babes, I read your stuff and I really think you the shits. And I was like, yes. And she's like, come through, let's have a chat. And literally that's how it started. We had one conversation. She asked me what I needed, and I said, this is what I need. And she said, well, start. And I started. And I traveled too much, even for my own good. So what was fun about the book is that I would be doing research in airport transit lounges, in planes. And so my laptop would be up. And of course, sometimes I'd have the vulva there. Why not? And so, even writing the book, I found myself in activism. I was like, I'm deliberately not going to shut down this page because I can see that you're like horrified. And I'm indulging in this. Like, I love it. And I mean, I would write in so many countries, in so many spaces. And I often, I mean, Amsterdam was one of the places that I reference in the book because it has a deep, significant impact on me as a person, but on the advocacy work for sex work decrim, but also, in places like Berlin, right? Seattle, in campuses. I mean, people are you always on time. I'm like, yeah, so I can sneak in 20 minutes just to type, like that's the kind. So I would find myself that the Constitution Hill. I was at Afropunk last year. And so being there, being proximal to the women's prison, so there's a lot that I think the spaces where I wrote contributed, either to remind me or to not doubt myself or not to think I'm too much. Because sometimes like, maybe you are just too political now. I just slow down. And then things will happen, or I'd be in spaces where it's like, yes. And I would just do that. So, and the voice notes to my poor editor Jane. I mean, honestly, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd be sending voice notes, about how to get ready for anal sex, about the big O, and she'd be like, well, I mean, I'm sure I can say this, she won't mind, but, she'd be like, oh, well, since you've sent it, and I have a lot of colds, so my voice is usually very hoarse. And she's like, well, it sounds so sexy, I'm just listening, to it with my husband. I'm like, yeah, so the work of the book was done. Even in the writing, we were already like, yeah, this is where we're going. So that was fun. That's an inner joke.
Thank you so much for your work. I mean, right now it feels like a moment of, no matter how fleeting, but a moment of reprieve when we are so affronted and brutalized. So we appreciate your work. It's a gift, and I thank you. I have a question after going through it and thinking about sexual liberation, a sexual revolution, and the ways in which even the most kind of progressively framed forms of sexuality inhabit a conservatism that reflects the thing we're coming from. So I've been moving around a lot of spaces as well, and with a lot of different kind of queer people, and I've noticed that there's kind of especially within the LGBT community, a bisexual hatred or disdain. And even bisexual is kind of weird. And I want you to talk a little bit about sexuality and the flux and the spectrum. But, gay men are like, ew, vaginas. And lesbians are like, ew, dicks. But what happens when you think about it? No? No, I mean, there's a real sense among lesbians that having sex with men is a betrayal, right? But how do you think a sexual revolution, without dismantling or necessarily doing away with those categories of identification that liberate people and give them a sense of power over their own sexuality, but how do you think that thinking about sex on a spectrum, in a flux, having it when you want, how you want, on your terms, can be preserved or free without us going back to those binaries about what sex ought to be, even when we've broken through a heteronormative mold?
Okay. So I think what's important for all of us who are in the space is to be deliberate in everything that we do, to make sure that, again, ask the questions, why do gays and lesbians and transgender people, why were they ever othered in the first place? Because if we understand that, we may come up with ways to make sure that that doesn't happen again, but it means we will deliberately think of root causes, structural causes. And I think advancing queer theory, queer politics, and thought leadership is very important, because often we find that we have to import a lot of the work. We live in South Africa. There isn't any campus that will teach you on critical race theory. He had to go to America for Professor Kimberly Crenshaw to do that. So that's a problem. Like, how are we in South Africa and you can't learn critical race theory in university, anyway? I had to Google Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. I had to Google Loretta Ross to understand issues of intersectionality, reproductive justice, and then because of my lived experience as a black woman in South Africa and my locality, which is in the South, the global South, I then advanced based on my experiences and the experiences of my patients, what I then think now sexual and reproductive justice should look like. And I think we need to imagine, but at the same time live it. because we are convicted about what's correct, what needs to be recentered. But we need to start living that life so that others can see it and be inspired by it. And we can only get there by talking. We can only get there by removing the silence. For example, the issues of how even lesbian relationships will mimic some hierarchical, heteronormative, who's the guy, who's the woman. Yes, we don't want people outside of the queer community asking that question, but if even in our privacy, we are mimicking that, it's harder for us to then live. That doesn't make sense. So we kind of have to have, I think, create moments, create spaces where we can discuss what is it about proximal to whiteness? What is it about being proximal to heteronormativity that has benefits? And so what are those benefits and who are they benefiting? Because even if you look at the spectrum, the G in LGBTIQA still benefits far beyond the T and the I. But are we willing to have those honest conversations? Right? And how that replicates itself even in medicine, even in programming, even in what's available out there. And so I think we South Africans don't talk enough for the sake of talking. I think when we talk, it's because of the disaster and we have outcomes. And we have a funder that sits there and says, I said you must talk today and these are the deliverables. We need to start talking for the sake of talking, but I think we need to start writing and living these imagined futures. Let's try as much as we can and do it now, but again in the context of real threats of violence that come with being queer and being fully who you are, and how do we assist each other. And I think for me that's why allyship is important, you know. And ally is an active thing. You don't tell me you're my ally, you project it in how you think and how you behave and in how you show up for me. I get to tell you you're an ally. You don't tell us that, oh, I'm an ally to black women. But that's more of queer people. And so how do we then create those spaces where our allies can absorb some of the the fallouts that come with being whoever we are. And I think that's possibly one of the things. But unless we go at it in terms of structured learning, in terms of universities, and let trickle down to schools, but also in management and corporates. Everyone needs induction on gender and sexualities. Everybody, doesn't matter whether you're an economist, accountant, a biomarine biologist, because we never had that structured, comprehensive learning that just normalizes and recenters normal things. So even in our solutions, we have to resource and put money to ensuring that when we're saying, let's create new curricula, that we can actually find someone to come up with new words in Sotho, because we can say we want inclusive language, but unless there's someone going to resource and find the process of coming with the words, we're not going to get new words.
I was in a fight/debate, and I'd like to clarify it. Is squirting a thing?
Is what?
Squirting.
Is squirting a legitimate thing?
Oh, okay.
Squirting. So squirting it can happen. Squirting has been brought into the limelight partly, I think 70% due to pornography. And how, because people forget that porn is making movies and things are edited, so they can record for 2 hours and you only see 2 minutes. So if you are trying to get your body to do what they did in 2 hours in the 2 minutes that you are viewing, you are never going to be happy with your sex life. And that's why we need more feminist porn, guys. Come on, do it for us. Because there's nothing wrong with erotic literature or erotica or anything like that, but I think it's, again, the pressure that women are under to squirt often. I don't say, Tlaleng, you must squirt because you want to squirt. There's external pressure for me to prove that I can squirt, to prove that a penis is powerful, to have made me squirt. So I'm not even squirting for me. So do you see what I'm saying? And so I think if we can remove the scripts that we prescribe on ourselves while we are having sex, which leads up to Funeka's question about, how do you become sexual? without having to have an orgasm and let the orgasm then be the validation that you've had with sex. We need to redefine that, because dry humping is a valid form of sexual expression. And if we're going to speak to young people and exceptionalize penetration as if that's the only valid form of sex, it means we can't talk to them about dry humping. It means they will actually be pressured to go to penetration to prove how macho they are. And so, nibbling on the ears and the toes, right, valid form of sexual expression. You can have an orgasm without penetration just by rubbing your nipples. But if, again, you are focused on something...
What? You don't know? See?
Yes, that can happen. And so I think some people have squirted only once ever in their lives. Some people will never squirt. And you will have those people who squirting for them is like a party trick. And you can't tell before which, there's no way. And I think that's why I'm a full supporter of autoeroticism and self-pleasure and masturbation, because then that can teach you how to delay an orgasm, for example, how to listen to the feedback that your body is giving, because often someone wants to have sex with you, so you have sex because someone wants it, and then everything is consumed about the orgasm, and no one is doing the listening, the feedback. What does your breast feel like at this stage of sexual pleasure? What does, my thigh, like the thighs are clapping and thundering, like, well, yeah, you see. Like, what is that? Like, when that happens, like, what happens in my spine? Like, what happens in my eyes? So we don't pay enough attention to just what our body is saying and doing. We are just focused on the orgasm. And unfortunately for women, it's not even your own orgasm, it's someone else's orgasm. And so I think we need to redefine, the fact that sex often starts in an erection and ends with ejaculation. There's still a lot you can do after an ejaculation with a flaccid penis, trust me. And that the ejaculation doesn't have to define the end. But when you talk about consent, we never talk about when will we finish. Yes, I want it. Yes, so I've said yes. Yes, we're using a condom, but also. And so then the ejaculation ends up being the default thing. So whether you are pleasured, you are happy, satisfied, it then becomes nothing, because now people turn over and they carry on watching soccer or whatever. And I think what's also important is to talk about. So if you think about your vagina having sex with the vagina. And it's the only type of sex that has its own chapter. All the other sexes. With the right type of lubricant, the right amount of lubricant, there's so much more that we can do. The scissoring doesn't have to burn and hurt your pubic bone. Yeah, You see, when I'm here, I get to see their faces. It's fabulous. And so we need to talk about that, right? What does pleasure look like? I mean, what does pleasure look like when you have an injury on your leg, and suddenly some positions are just painful or awkward? What do? We know we live in a country with very high statistics for car accidents, and we count the deaths very well. But no one is counting the survivors and the spinal injuries and the amputations, right? The same way when you talk about breast cancer and cervical cancer, the pleasure of those women, the identity, the self-image, self-esteem, all of those, we don't really talk about it just looking at sexual pleasure. Which leads me to the second point of Funeka's comment, is that a lot of the time when you are in the public sector, you are taught to prioritize. If you're not dying now, you're gonna wait because there's someone else who's dying right now that I need to go and help. But that often means, because we are short-staffed, there isn't nearly enough resources. When you come and you say, I really want to have the best sex ever, can you help me? People are gonna ridicule you, like, what? We are busy with emergency, we are busy with life-threatening, the what? And the sad part of it is if you are a rape survivor, you get stigmatized for wanting to enjoy sex again even after the rape. So society punishes you for not wanting to carry that and let that define you forever. Because it's as if you remain there, you make it more valid that it really happened. And so part of, again, why this is part of activism is that I do help a lot of women and queer folk who have survived some form of violence, violation, rape, and they do want to have fulfilling sex again. It takes a while because there's a psychological, mental health element to it. You may actually have developed secondary mental health issues like anxiety, avoidance, depression, right? So if you're only treating the depression with tablets and not therapy, it means there's other things that we're not gonna get to the bottom of. And issues like vaginismus, right, where you have the involuntary pelvic floor muscle, they just contract. And you can't get penetration from a sex toy, even a finger, an earbud. It varies with different people. And for some people it's secondary, so something happened. And now your body knows to just shut down, avoid, just make it stop. And so even that involves things like pelvic physio. Which clinic in the public sector would you go to say, can you please assist me with pelvic physio for my kegels so I can have good orgasms and penetration? It doesn't exist. And so these are the types of challenges. That's why for me, I always position sexual pleasure within a human rights framework, right? The fact that we have a right to pleasurable sexual experiences, because if it's a rights argument, I can make it into a policy. If it's in policy, it can influence training, it can influence budgets, it can influence staffing, and that can then influence commodities, lubricants in public spaces. They are nowhere to be found. So if you, a survivor of rape, and you just want to rediscover your own sexuality in your own body again, you must still go and buy lubricant. If you want to have vagina to vagina sex, mouth to vagina sex, you must still cut up the condom, the external condom, which used to be called the male condom, to make your own dental dam. You can't find that in public spaces. But it's a thing again about which pleasure is prioritized, which pleasure and which bodies enjoy the hierarchy and the benefits of what that comes with. And so I think for me, I think sex can be a form of activism, and having good sex is definitely a form of activism. And for some of us who are there and we can do that work, but hopefully these things can trickle down to just anyone, anyway, just wanting to have sex however the way they want, and they should be able to have access to tools that, this corner, that can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. I kind of have two, so I guess you could just pick which one you want to do, because I know we don't have a lot of time. So the first one was basically about people like trying to figure out what best suits their body, and boys and girls trying to, I guess, experiment, but the problematic things that could happen by like using people to like do that. And I guess the second one would be about the double standards of boys and girls losing their V card, because I remember the time when my brother had found out. It was kind of like, I guess, a few months later, and although he was shocked at first, he then turned around and got mad at me about it.
The V card.
V card.
Oh, your virginity.
Yeah. And which was crazy because he lost 15 and I was 19, so I'm like, why are you so mad? So just like the relationship that girls have, their siblings, their mothers, or their fathers, with them supporting them in that journey when they're supporting their sons but not their daughters.
So here's the thing. You used losing the V card, right? So just even language-wise, why is it a loss? Losing it to who? Why is virginity something to be lost? and who's taking it from you? So things like she gave it up. Problem. So it can often just start with that language and how we frame sexual expressions. Someone else, one of the ministers, has said something like, you don't physically beat a woman, you beat her in the bedroom. That's disgusting. You can't. So how we normalize violence and sexual violence, people taking, someone losing, someone giving something up. That's then how we think of sex. So it means you want respect, autonomy, you want care about bodily dignity, you want care about consent. Because for you, it's up, and again, and you see a lot with young men, is that when you say no, they think it's an invitation to keep pushing. So they can then eventually be macho enough to be like, yeah, eventually I got her. They don't, well, they do realize that it's coercion. And coercion in South Africa's law is a form of assault. I think that language is very important. Boys don't have things like virginity testing. They don't have words to describe giving up, losing your virginity. Because male pleasure and male sexual expression is just something that is, for them, just what men do. And again, it's tied to the thing about how, I said earlier on, our vulvas are not even ours. Before they are yours, it's the chiefs, it's the priests, it's the communities, your brother, your fathers. When will it ever be yours? When will it ever be yours? And so that's the politics side of bodies, and I think you should push back and resist on that, especially on that individual level, because it is your brother, he's your family. Hopefully, you can kind of have those conversations. But I think we don't often see activism one-on-one as activism. We always think it must be this grand thing, that event. No, that in itself is a form of, advocating for yourself and for your own rights.
I just want to say I'm so excited. It's also just really lovely to sit here and be on this side of the room and listen. So thank you, both of you. Thank you, Dr. T. And my question was, you've talked a little bit about like the clitoris, right? And the power and the link and this education and how this comes to you also from science, right? And different researchers' work. And I'm just wondering, by you putting this together and through your brand, could you talk a little bit more about the aims that you want this book, like what you want it to give to us? Because I think about the way that I learned about the clitoris and clitoracy and how it was only in 1998 that this anatomy was even studied in a way that we understood what the anatomy actually was, and how impactful that's been for me and those that I've told about it. You put that, and I'm sure 1,000 other things that we don't know, into the book. So I'd love to hear your aspirations for that. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
So I say what I said, and what it does, it's up to the reader. Yes. I want you to be moved in ways that you need to be moved. I wrote it now because people who buy it, most of them know who Dr. T is, so they kind of know what's coming, and those who don't can discover and can unlearn, learn, but those who know me can advance and be like, oh, so that's why she's like this. That's why but I do think that the education and health education element is very strong. But I also want people to know that they have a right to be respected, and that especially young girls must expect to be respected. There's a resource section at the end of the book which tells you in which decades of life and what's important in terms of medically what you need to be having annual checkups for, but also resources of where to go, of other organizations, other people who are doing the work in the space, whether it's research, whether it's academia, whether it's service driven. I think that those are the two important sections that are more prescriptive, but otherwise, I think people can just find themselves there and have fun.
Buy the book. Thank you very much for yourselves.
Yeah,
because we need it, because it's a great book and it's easy to read, even though it's incredibly deep. Buy the book. Buy it for yourself, buy it for your kids, Buy it for your priest, buy it for your rabbi, buy it for your imam, buy it for your lover. Thank you very much.